Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we are going to be discussing the political stalemate that Ethiopia is having following the COVID-19 effects, the pandemic COVID-19 effects, and the postponement of the election. So for this, we invited Ethiopiaspoliticalstalemate. He is here with us. So Ethiopian, he's practicing lawyer based in Addis Ababa. He provides legal consultancy services for local and international institutions in areas of international investment, international investment law and law of international organizations. He also provides legal policy advisory services for governmental organization, and he holds his LLM degree in law from University of Turin in Italy. Thank you, Kia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mahalet, for having me today with you.
Okay, thank you for your time. So yeah, when we go directly to our discussion, so what happened is following the COVID-19, the global population is facing a multifaceted problem, and Ethiopia is no different for this. And this, the effects are manifesting gradually, like socially, economically, and politically. But the latter seems to cover the agenda of the nation in the last couple of weeks. So what happened is the term of office of the government will come to an end every 5 years, and so for this government in the coming September, and accordingly a general election was scheduled to be held in August. And now that's postponed indefinitely because of as a measure to contain the pandemic. How is this political stalemate caused? There are a number of countries, I think more than 50, who have postponed their election. What makes the Ethiopian one unique, and why is it in a deadlock? What does the constitution miss, and what is the way out for this?
Okay, so thank you very much, Mahi. First of all, the government has been preparing to hold the national election as per the schedule. For that, starting from the last year, it has been revising the relevant laws like the Political Parties Registration Proclamation, the Ethiopian National Electoral Board. It has been building the capacity of the board. For instance, appointing new board chairperson, and the head of the board has been appointed last year. And it has been also provided the huge amount of budgets, which was not thinkable in previous administration. So after all those preparations, the government through the National Electoral Board has disclosed the schedule for election, and the election was supposed to be conducted in August 2020, just after some 3-4 months. Unfortunately, in early March, the first case of coronavirus has been reported in Ethiopia, and the government was trying to minimize the problems, and unfortunately, the number of cases started to increase. So the executive had to declare state of emergency in order to counter this international pandemic. So according to Article 93 of the Ethiopian Constitution, there are conditions in which the executive can declare state of emergency. So this declaration will be approved by the parliament. In case of international war, natural disaster, this kind of pandemic, and even epidemic, and the instability that endangers the existence of the states. So in these cases, the executive can declare state of emergency. So the government declared state of emergency, and when we see that things have not been changed, and the number of cases, kept on increasing, so we're just left with 3-4 months, and within these months, it's very, very difficult to conduct, to prepare for the election, to conduct an election, free, fair election. So even if the government is willing, I don't think the health crisis will make it possible. So now, if we agree that it's impossible to conduct election during this time, there were some four options or constitutional options that were presented to avoid power vacuum. Unfortunately, under Ethiopian constitution, so the Article 54 of Ethiopian constitution, first of all, limits the power of the government or the power of the House of People's Representative and the executive for only 5 years. Mm-hmm. So the power of the government and the term of the House of People's Representative or the parliament will expire in August 2020. So without having conducting the national election, and if the power of the government expires in August, what would happen to the country? So as an option to fill this gap or to fill the power vacuum, the government, through the Attorney General, provided 4 options, which are strictly in line with the Ethiopian constitution. So one of the first option was to establish a kind of caretaker government for 6 months, according to Article 60 of Ethiopian constitution. The Prime Minister will dissolve the parliament and will have a minimum power, a kind of caretaker government, until national election will be conducted within 6 months. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the government will only have power to deliver basic services. It does not enact new laws, and it does not repeal the existing laws. It doesn't conclude international agreements such as loan or international loan or international agreements in general. So this has been considered as good option because it has been clearly, the good side of this option was it has been clearly stated under Ethiopian Constitution, Article 60. But the bad side is, the adverse impact will be, we will have a weak government, given the current situation that Ethiopia is in, we really need a bit stronger government, because many people believe that because Ethiopia has so many internal and external challenges, especially as a country building the biggest dam on the Blue Nile, we have imminent danger. Our relationship with neighboring riparian countries, especially with Egypt. So people say we need to have a government that can defend the country if there is any attack on its national security and sovereignty. So this was dismissed by many of the scholars and political commentators. The second option was to declare state of emergency, like to continue after the expiry. By the way, the current state of emergency will expire in August.
Also.
So the second option was to continue or to extend the state of emergency so that the government will be able to focus on the pandemic, and government will also be stronger because it will have extra powers. So this was also, it has also some good sides, like the making the government a bit stronger, but the side effect is it, so for instance, we declared state of emergency for 1 year or 6 months. What will happen after the expiration of the state of emergency? The parliament is already dissolved. So where are you going to take the proposal to extend state of emergency without having, after, I mean, dissolving the parliament, House of People's Representatives? And is it possible to conduct a national election under state of emergency? You know, state of emergency derogates some of the basic fundamental rights. You know, under Ethiopian constitution, under 93, only 3 rights are not derogable. So under this circumstance, is it really practical to conduct an election in a situation where people cannot like voice their protests? People cannot exercise their right to association and freedom of expression, you know. So this might be an obstacle to conduct free and fair election. And, you know, in many cases in international and in the case of other countries also shows that it's very, very difficult to conduct election while the country is in the state of emergency. So this was also has its own, you know, adverse impact. It's constitutional, one of the options under the constitution, but it has been dismissed by many scholars in the area and political commentators also. And I also believe that opposition parties must be free to explain or to campaign their policy. They have to be able to communicate to their communities and power base so that they can be chosen. So in the circumstance of state of emergency, it's unthinkable to do this. And the government might also abuse the powers it has under this situation. The third was amending the constitution. So under Article 104 of Ethiopian constitution, the requirement, the basic requirement to amend the constitution is from the 9 regions. It requires the approval of 6 regions, minimum of 6 regional states. So Ethiopia is a federal state, first of all. So there are 9 regions and the 2 special city administrations. So from the 9 regions, the constitution requires the approval of 6 regions, minimum of 6 regions, council, state council, and the approval of the 2 houses of the federal, like the House of Federation and the House of People's Representatives. So currently the ruling party controls all these 8 regions, has the controls and dominates exclusively these 9 regional councils, and it has also dominant control on the 2 houses. You know, unfortunately, the houses that we have and the House of People's Representatives that we have now were elected in 2015 under a very difficult situation. So that's why this new reform on new administration came to Ethiopia after so many struggles. So, but you know, those who were elected in 2015 were almost 100%. The ruling party has won the seat. So that's that background. Having that background, it wouldn't be that much difficult to amend the constitution, specifically in the case of, for instance, in other countries' constitution, the parliament can prolong its power when the country is in state of war, when the country faces pandemic, you know, these kind of situations. So unfortunately, under Ethiopian constitution, there is no specific provision, you know, extending the term limit of the House of People's Representatives. So, but there is one major requirement under this Article 102 of Ethiopian Constitution: public discussion. Whenever the government intends to conduct constitutional amendment, it needs to engage the people. Without consulting the people, the population, a single provision could not be amended. So even if the government can fulfill the major requirements, which is approval from at least 6 regions and the approval from the 2 houses, federal houses, the House of People's Representative and the House of Federation, but it cannot conduct public discussion during this time, because as you know, under state of emergency, we are under a state of emergency, and it's very difficult to gather the people and take their comments on the proposed amendment. So without fulfilling this, if the constitution is going to be amended, it's going to set a wrong precedent. So it has the advantage. The advantage is the government can easily amend specific provision, like for instance, extending the power of the parliament for extra 2 or 3 years when there is this kind of situation. You know, the situation should be justified. Mm-hmm. And but without having the consent of the general public, it will create a bad precedent. Additionally, this constitutional amendment might have its own legitimacy crisis, because this constitution is amended by the houses and the councils fully controlled by the ruling party. Yeah. Exactly. So those who even criticize, you know, there are many people who criticize even the existing constitution is not inclusive. You know, during the legislation process in the 1995, many people were not that much consulted. So there are groups and politicians who say even the existing constitution doesn't have legitimacy. So when you add this constitutional amendment with the parliament controlled and with the house and councils controlled by the ruling party, it will have its own political legitimacy crisis and problems. So the fourth option, which was adopted by the government and accepted by many constitutional lawyers, is requesting for constitutional interpretation. So historically, most of the constitutions, if you see in the US or other European countries, even in Africa, in South Africa, India, most of the constitutions were developed through interpretation, constitutional interpretation. So constitutional interpretation is not literally like a kind of translation. So it's a science. It's a science, and you know it requires the deep research, understanding the intention of the legislators. So the government, the legislators, the intention of the legislators of this constitution is not to make this country government-less, you know, or their intention is not to make to create a power vacuum in this kind of situation. Even if there is no clear provision on the extension of the power of the government in this kind of pandemic, there should be interpretation considering the fundamental principles, the preamble, and the values of the Constitution. So, for instance, in the United States Constitution, there is no clear statement that says black is equal to the white. Mm-hmm. You know, what happened in 1960s? You know, it's the same Constitution, the United States Constitution. So the framers of the United States Constitution, when they refer to all men are equal, they are saying men, whites, you know, male, whites, and to some extent propertied, you know. So it doesn't make reference to the black, and it does not also outlaw slavery, you know. Clearly it doesn't say that, you know. the constitution adopted by the framers of the United States Constitution. So after so many struggles, as you know, in 1960s, the Black African Americans are equal politically, economically, culturally, in all aspects. So this was done through constitutional interpretation. You know, after considering the change of the time, you know, after considering the whole purpose of the Constitution, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court was has adopted the equality of these two races, and even the constitutional review or the judicial review of courts, it was the United States courts, the Supreme Court adopted this through constitutional interpretation. There is no clear provision that says the Supreme Court has the power to interpret the American Constitution. It doesn't. There is no this kind of statement. So it was through constitutional interpretation. In India, the same thing. In Germany, there is a specific constitutional court. In South Africa, there is also a special constitutional court. The South African Constitutional Court has made decision regarding capital punishment through constitutional interpretation. So when you come to Ethiopia, okay, this happened. There is a pandemic. We are not able to conduct election as per the schedule.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen after September 30? The government will no longer have the power to administer this country. So are we going to be in an anarchy, or are we going to be in some kind of statelessness? So we go back to the intention of the legislators of Ethiopian constitution. So their discussion, when you see their discussion, when you see the whole purpose of this constitution, in the preamble it says, the purpose of this constitution is to create one economic and political community, one strong state. So the intention of the intention of the legislators of the Ethiopian constitution is not to create a power vacuum, or is not to make or to dismantle this country when this kind of situation happens. Their intention is to preserve, even to make or to create one political, literally it says word by word, one economic and political community. This is their intention. So in order to create one economic and political community, you need to have a government. This country, sovereignty, unity should be preserved. Law and order should be maintained. So in order to achieve this, you need to have a government, So what I think is, after the approval of the parliament last week, they have adopted they have resolved to request the Council of Constitutional Inquiry. So under Ethiopian law, the constitution is interpreted by House of Federation. So the House of Federation is a representation of, or is composed of, representatives from almost all Ethiopian ethnic groups, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia.
Okay.
So they are given the ultimate.
Come to that later on. So like you very well explained what this political stalemate, and also you have explained what are the suggestions given as a way out or to unlock this puzzle. Yes, then I was thinking this. So as we speak, of course, at the end of last week, the government, the parliament has already adopted the last option, which is interpretation of the constitution. But already this week, there are groups who have announced that regardless of what the government announces for the interpretation of the constitution, and regardless of the pandemic, who are going to still hold a regional election. And also there are analysts or scholars who are saying, to quote, okay, there is COVID, but life goes on while COVID-19 is still there. Yeah. is this legitimate?
Yeah.
Are regional governments allowed to hold their own election, regardless of what the parliament, the federation decides?
So, okay, thank you. This is a good question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's clearly stated under Ethiopian constitution, the federal constitution, article 102, that the matters related with election and referendum are provided to the federal Ethiopian electoral board. So whether it's a regional election or a local election or district election, anything related with election is vested or provided to the Ethiopian National Electoral Board. So because there is a political difference between the federal government and the regional government that's claiming that to conduct election within its region, because of these political problems, it's a kind of political provocation, I call it. It's just to tell the federal government, we can do it. There is nothing that stops us. It's kind of undermining the powers of the federal government. So politically, I don't think it's healthy. Legally, it's unconstitutional. Even if they conduct election, I don't think that will be legitimate by the federal government, and it will put them in a legitimacy crisis. So for me, I think they will reconsider the decision in the coming months or weeks, because this is totally unacceptable. Because this is clearly, there is nothing that, even indirectly, there is nothing that has been stated regarding the possibility of conducting election at regional level with regional institutions. So first, it will be, the first thing, it's unconstitutional, as I said. Secondly, even if there is election, it will be illegitimate. Third, even if there are possibilities, it's very difficult to conduct free and fair election in this situation. People are, many people are not interested to go and elect because of the pandemic. People are frustrated. Recently, some cases, new cases, have been reported in that region. So it's a kind of political competition or political, I call it, provocation. So there should be discussion, if possible. The government, the federal government, and that regional government, it's Tigray regional government. So that Tigray regional government administrators and the party officials should sit down with the federal government and the federal ruling party to settle the political and legal problems that happened between them. Otherwise, this kind of provocation will have very dangerous consequence, and the federal government has to defend the constitution. There shouldn't be any negotiation or discussion on the enforcement of the fundamental provisions of the constitution. So it's just, in short, it's a reflection of the political problem between the federal government and the regional government, and especially the party that's ruling the regional government, the Tigray regional government. The officials should come to their senses. They cannot continue hijacking the political process and the legal process. So it will be self-defeating in the long run.
Okay, there are, if we see, following the political stalemate, there are different categories that I have seen as per my reading and listening to different media outlets. These categories, or you can say also blocks of thoughts, if you wish. And there is one which says any change. It should be either amendment of the constitution or through interpretation of the constitution, either way to prolong the stay, to prolong the term of office of the government. There is another block, which is the second block also, which says this is, which takes the constitution literally. The term of office of the government will come to an end, and thus we should hold the election at the end as originally planned in August, and that's the way out. And the third block and the last one is which says also, which refers to the constitution, okay, the term of office of the government will come to an end in September, and therefore all political parties should come and should seek for a consultation of different political parties, and then from there to look the way forward. You know, what is interesting is all of them are referring to the constitution. The first one says it's a constitutional problem, and therefore it should be solved constitutionally. And the second one says, okay, because the constitution has said clearly it should be, the term for the government should come to an end in 5 years, and we should stick to that. Literally, that's how it takes, that's how it, the group sticks, that block of thought sticks to that, to the constitution. And the third one also, like all of them are saying constitutionally they are correct, and all of them are referring to this constitution. For me, it's really interesting how controversial is this constitution. This constitution is, you know, it's like a religion. There are different sectors. Okay. If you see, like for example, in Christianity, in Christian religions, and all of them refer to the Bible, you know, and they are correct in their own way. How controversial is it, or is there something that we do not understand?
Yeah. So coming to the points that you raised, I think some politicians, and especially in hardline opposition camps, they suggest for transitional government.
Yeah.
So they're saying the term limit of the government expires in September, the end of September. So after September, all of us are equal. There is no prime minister, there is no government. So they are calling for it's a kind of suspension of the constitution. We should suspend the constitution, and we should try to find out a solution out of the out of the constitution. So I mean, suspending or setting aside the constitution. So let's sit and negotiate. Directly, it's a kind of, let's share the power, political power. So on this point, they may have their own justifications, but what I believe is any solution should come from the constitution itself. Any solution which comes extra constitutional solution will not be sustainable, will not be useful for Ethiopia as a country, because we have a very low constitutionalism experience. So we should experience constitutionalism, and the call for transitional government is totally out of the constitution, and it will create chaos. So practically, it's not possible for me. Even if there is a will from political actors, practically it's impossible for me. Because as you know, the even political landscape, the environment, there are extreme positions. So there are groups who are fighting for their own ethnic group freedom or independence, or you call it self-administration. There are groups who say the current extreme focus on ethnic politics is not good, and who are calling themselves as parties following the citizenship politics, or parties based on citizenship politics. There are also groups who say they want a kind of both, a mix of both ethnic identity plus citizenship politics. So unfortunately, we don't think there are strong parties with coherent and comprehensive policy that will lead this 100 plus million population, the second most populous nation in Africa. You know, kind of, you cannot lead, you know, you cannot lead this big country with a very localized political or polarized political standing. So we have currently more than 100 political parties. What does that show?
Yeah.
Do you really think all these parties will come up and provide an effective governance, protecting the national interest and sovereignty of our country? Even if there is a will, do you think they will agree? If you keep them in a meeting to identify or nominate 10 ministerial positions, I don't think they will even agree in 2 months or 3 months, because everybody claims that they have the power base, they have the support base. So for me, it might have those who advocate for transitional government, they might have their own justification, but practically, legally, it's unconstitutional, because under the thing I forget is, under the Ethiopian constitution, whenever this kind of situation happens, there is no statement that says transitional government will be established. Not even an indirect indication of this. If you see the discussions during the legislation process of this constitution, there is no an indirect reference to form a transitional government when this kind of situation happens. So if the constitutional interpretation is not acceptable for them, what makes the transitional proposal for transitional establishment of transitional government constitutional?
Is one quick question.
It's a kind of
is the constitutional interpretation is mentioned directly or indirectly in the constitution?
So, you know, the constitutional interpretation, people are considering that the government's power is extended. So the assumption is the government is yet to present request for constitutional interpretation to the Ethiopian Council of Constitutional Interpretation. So the decision of the Council of Constitutional Inquiry and the final decision of the House of Federation, we don't know now. But the procedure is the government will present this question, this dilemma, this constitutional gap to the concerned organ, which is the Council of Constitutional Inquiry.
That brings us to the next question. Quickly, you can answer it. You can answer it with that. How fair and free is this House of Federation? How is it structured? How is it composed of? In other countries, as you mentioned, the Constitutional Court, how fair and free the decision of the House of Federation will be? And with that, also, if you can answer, what can we expect? Okay, now all the others are aside, out of the table. The government adopted the last option. What can we expect out of this? Can you say something? What are the possibilities?
Okay, so as you said, there are questions on the neutrality and impartiality of the institutions. So what we have to consider is, these are the institutions that we have at this time. Whether they are partial or impartial, we don't have other institutions. If we start to talk about like legitimacy of institutions, we can start from the parliament itself. You know how the 2015 election was conducted, the situation, how many journalists, political dissenting opinions, those political dissenting opinions, they were migrated, they were made to flee the country. Most of them have been arrested. So our political past was not fair, and we're just starting to experience some kind of democratic culture. So in other countries, by the way, this is one of the provisions I believe should be reconsidered regarding the constitutional interpretation. I also believe would be better if we have a special constitutional court to interpret the constitution, because currently the constitutional interpretation is, the power to interpret the constitution is provided to the House of Federation. House of Federation is a political organ. Those representatives in the House of Federation are the political, they are elected from among the parties. So that means indirectly they're politicians.
Yeah.
So this might, this is one of the weakness of constitutional interpretation in Ethiopia. But there are also who argue this constitution is not only a legal document, it's also a political document. So under Article 8, it says the nation, nationalities, and peoples of Ethiopia are the final sovereign, and the power is vested in them. So this political document, the constitution, which is made, legislated, and approved by the Ethiopian nation, nationalities, and peoples, should also be interpreted by the same organ that represents these nation nationalities. That's the logic. So currently,
you are saying, however it's composed, somehow it is legitimate.
Yeah. So even before the application reached to the House of Federation, the team of experts called Council of Constitutional Inquiry, which includes the President of the Supreme Court and the Vice President of the Supreme Court. Additionally, there are experts. So the House of Federation is not a legal institute. I mean, we don't find legal experts. So to assist House of Federation, to give recommendations to House of Federation, the Council of Constitutional Inquiry is established. So when the government presents request for constitutional interpretation to Council of Constitutional Inquiry, this council will sit, research, consider all the principles and values of the Constitution, then proposes a recommendation to the House of Federation. And the House of Federation will make final decision on proposal or on the advice, based on the advice of the Council of Constitutional Inquiry. So somewhat the lawyers involved, because as I said, the President of the Supreme Court will directly involve, and the Vice President also directly involved in constitutional interpretation, at least providing recommendations, assisting the House of Federation in a way that enables to perform its duties properly. So my expectation is that once the government submits a request for constitutional interpretation, after reviewing the question, after considering all the fundamental principles of the Constitution, we expect the Council will forward its recommendations to the House of Federation. And the House of Federation will make final decision, an enabling decision, a decision that prevents power vacuum, a decision that prevents the collapse of the state. So we expect, so as you said, the constitutional interpretation is not something done. So we are yet to see the outcome of the request of the government for constitutional interpretation.
Okay, just quickly, I was thinking whether it's interpreted or amended. The whole thing is it came because of the COVID-19 crisis, right? And no one
Yes,
knows
yes,
when the end of this COVID-19 is. It's really became hard to make predictions, as previous
yes,
predictions are failing. Uh,
yes,
and then following that also, so subsequently, no one knows when the election will be because it's
yes,
postponed indefinitely, right?
yes.
Are we somehow waiting for Godot, like something that never happens?
Yeah,
It will
so
happen
that's good
eventually, but we
question.
don't know when.
Yeah, you're right. So this is good question. Uh, First of all, uh, the the Council of Constitutional Inquiry in the House of Federation will provide, I hope, it's my expectation, will provide an enabling interpretation to the government to focus on the pandemic, to at least focus on the pandemic until the World Health Organization confirms, confirms the slowing down of the pandemic in Ethiopia. There are international institutions and local institutions who have who declare the slowing down of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So immediately, for instance, if the pandemic if we manage to control the pandemic within like 6 months or 8 months, then immediately after we control the pandemic, the government will be given adequate time to prepare for election, to totally focus on the election. So for instance, if we manage to control the pandemic like within 6 months or 8 months, then the government might be given some extra 8 months or 1 year to prepare for election. So election requires, especially election in Ethiopia requires, the population is more than, at least there are more than 30 up to 40 million people who are capable for election. So it requires, and we don't have adequate infrastructures. Until now, 70 up to 80% of our people live in rural areas. So you need to deliver all required equipments to all those rural areas, and you have to train more than 200,000 election executives. So for this, the government must be given adequate time to prepare itself. So this is not, I think, I mean, for me, I fully understand the concern of political opposition, political parties and other politicians who protest the government. I understand that. But what we have to consider is we are doing this not to extend the power of the Dr. Abiy's administration. For me, for someone who really is concerned about the existence of the state beyond short term or short sighted interest, political interest, if we see it broadly, it's about the existence of the state. What we have to consider is Ethiopia is in a very difficult situation. If recently the Egyptian Foreign Ministry has submitted a letter to the United Nations Security Council to stop Ethiopia from filling the dam starting from this July. And there are also rumors from Sudan that they are trying to focus on, they're trying to work with kind of Egypt, like regarding the filling of the dam. So there are also problems of this, what do you call, locust.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the Minister of Agriculture has disclosed a report that desert locust, I think.
Yeah, in the whole.
So the Minister of Agriculture has disclosed more than 30 million people will be exposed to problems of food security unless we do I mean, unless we get adequate support from international community, plus unless our farmers focus on the, use the available resource to increase production. And to the eastern part, there are problems in Somalia with Al-Shabaab terrorism. And we have also some challenges, internal challenges in the west of the country, in Wallagga area. There are armed groups who still fight the government. So when you consider this chaos and problems, we have to see the situation in a way that, understands all these issues. We have to see it broadly. Not, it's not, some of the politicians I see, they have made it some kind of personal, like you may hate the government or the system or all the government officials, but the reality is we're in a very difficult situation. So at any cost, we should be able to counter these challenges together.
Okay, that brings us to the end
of our national interest. Yeah.
Our interview, and I'll just give you the floor to say, to put your message out, for the people, for the political actors, or for everyone. What do you have to say?
So thank you very much. As I said, in all of our discussions and political competition, what we have to make at the center is the best interest of the country. So currently, we have to sit and discuss with the government. The ruling party should also be able to engage those who have concerns regarding the administration of this country. They might be involved in providing suggestions, consultations to the government. But if we are like saying, there is a Amharic poem, saying called Nekamotku Sardoevkal. It's a kind of, if I'm not going to share something, I don't care whether that's, unless I am on power, I don't care whether this country is destroyed or not. So our politicians should be farsighted. They have to see the situation broadly. They have to consider the current situation, the current situation on the ground, and they have to forward pragmatic solution, not theoretically. I mean, in a school or in a classroom, we can discuss on theories on some other issues. So the major challenge is the solution should be something that should be practical on the ground. So let's focus on our unity, peace, order, and I hope we will overcome these challenges in the near future.
Yeah, that was a very good, insightful explanation that we have from Kia. Thank you very much. And I just want to say this at the end. Personally, I feel that as a citizen, there's a big elephant in the room now in Ethiopia's case, in the country, which is the coronavirus. And we all have to be working or contributing how we are going to prevent this virus on the containment measures, whether it's individuals, civic societies, political actors, and the government. And really, I feel sorry that how slightly that subject is moved out of the table and all this discussion is replaced by a political. I mean, if there is no well-being of the people, and with all the surrounding problems, the security problems that the country is facing, what are you going to govern? What are you going to administer, including the government, So our focus should be on that. And whatever we do, history shall record our judgments. Yeah. And thank you very much, Kia, for your time. And I hope we will meet again.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you very much, Mahi, for this. Bye.
Bye.